Hello everyone and welcome to a new video from Your Overwatch. I'm Eddie the Chump and today we're going to talk about support ults, or rather the problems that a lot of players, including us ourselves to be fair, have in using them at the right time. The main thing to remember about support ults in Overwatch is that they can be some of the most transformative in the entire game, and by that I mean they're some of the very strongest, and if used properly can completely flip a team fight from a losing position into a winning one. So much so that if a team mismanages their support ult economy throughout a match, they are much more likely to lose in the long run. So there's actually an incredible amount of pressure on support players to make sure that they use their ult at the right time and don't waste it, because if you do, your team will then be fighting an uphill battle against your opponent's offensive ult utility and losing more team fights than you would have done than if you'd not wasted it earlier. And when you think about it, because support ultimate utility is so intrinsic to what a support is and their function within the team, it's not really excusable to have bad ults at any rank really. And if you learn how to have better ults and use them properly, you will simply rank up to at least diamond even with middling mechanics. A great example of this is the eternal battle between a Zen and a Genji over who can generate their ultimate faster. Zen's trance is the best answer to a Genji blade even if nanoed, so when playing against a Genji, the pressure is on the Zenyatta player to not waste his trance too early on silly little mistakes like keeping only himself alive if he's being focused by a flanker. To relate it back to myself and my own weaknesses for just a moment, I've always been a pretty bad Mercy player, and one of the biggest reasons for that is that I could never quite grasp when and where to use Valkyrie. In the Mercy meta, I was so bad at this crucial piece of decision making that FREEDO and Liam, when they played with me, begged me not to play Mercy at almost any cost. I'd use it too early, I wouldn't use it when it would have had real impact value. These are really critical mistakes and it did cost us a lot of matches. But thankfully, this video is about fixing this kind of thing. So let's start with a few basic principles before we get into the gameplay examples. The first one is that as a support, your ultimates often represent the best opportunity for you to have a proactive impact on the match. Apart from a few exceptions like Ana's Bionade and Sleeps and Zen's fragging, supports are generally not the heroes in a team comp that can just go out and make stuff happen. Tanks and DPS are the ones that go out and make space or get picks. A support's normal job is in propping those roles up as they do that. However, almost universally, when a support has their ultimate in their pocket, this represents a real opportunity to have direct influence on the flow of a team fight. They all work slightly differently, obviously. Trance is most often used in a defensive capacity, where you're saving your team from your opponents trying to use their resources on you. Compare that to Nano, which can give you a distinct offensive edge when used in combo with another ult like Genji Blade, or just a marauding main tank on Reinhardt or Winston. They, and the other support ults, are swing factors, so knowing when to actually apply them is obviously very important. So here's a basic rule for you. You want to use your support ult to win a fight that you weren't already going to win. Now that isn't actually as simple as it first sounds, because if we take the trance example, you might be tempted to use it if, say, a number of your teammates get chipped down very low at the start of a fight, so you use it to keep them up, but then after it's over, the opponent's Genji pulls out his blade and you all die anyway. Remember that at all times, your opponents are trying to get you to commit these very powerful ultimates too early. If you do, you'll not only likely lose the fight you're already in, but you'll also likely be set back in ultimate economy for future fights. So there are very real pitfalls even when you're trying to use your ult in the proper way. In an effort to try and help you and make this clearer, what we're now going to do is take a look at some gameplay examples from ourselves and from some of you guys who have submitted gameplay to be reviewed. Now just quickly, if you'd like some of your gameplay used in videos like this in the future, you can submit clips to the email address youroverwatchplays@gmail.com. Links to HD YouTube clips work the best, and the only real requirement is that they can't be absolutely terrible quality. With that out of the way, let's dive straight into the examples. And just to show you guys that we're not above making some of these mistakes too, the first clip that I'm going to show you is actually one of FREEDO's. As his team are attempting a retake on Nepal's Sanctum, the fight initially starts off really well, as they manage to focus down the enemy's main tank, Orisa. After a little bit of poke, FREEDO and his McCree attempt to flank left and get behind the enemy team. Unfortunately, his Roadhog gets booped off the map, and his McCree dies when the enemy Mercy, Junkrat and Roadhog all peel back for him. Now the fight's actually still winnable because his Orisa has started taking point with her shield, the enemy Mercy, Roadhog and Junkrat aren't there because they peeled back to kill the McCree, and his Junkrat is using his tire. Now the mistake here is that he uses his beat way too early, despite the enemy Lucio being the only one on point to damage his team. If he'd have delayed his beat until the enemy team had to contest because his main tank is currently capping, that extra beat shield health would have allowed his tank and his Junkrat to carry through the fight. As it happens, by the time the enemy Roadhog does contest with his whole hog ultimate, the beat health advantage has completely disappeared and his Orisa dies. If his shield tank had stayed up, it would have been a lot harder for their opponents to dislodge them before their respawns came back in time. The difference between getting real value and almost none in this case can't have been more than 3 or 4 seconds. If his Orisa is in a fight on point and that beat comes in, that swing factor that we're talking about with support ults comes into full effect. Now we're going to move into the viewer submitted clips, and in this first one, the enemy is attempting a retake on Ilios Lighthouse. As the fight breaks, the enemy Rhine hits an Earth Shatter on the viewer's Roadhog. He then attempts to use Trance to save the Roadhog, but doesn't follow him through the pin, so the Roadhog dies anyway. So what ends up happening is that he just stands in the middle of the map using Trance on people who are already quite high health or who aren't taking an incredible amount of damage. His team are actually already down too, as their soldier already died to the fire right after the Earth Shatter. This Trance essentially gets no value. It doesn't swing the fight in any way or deny any enemy resources. Now in the second clip, the Trance also gets little value, but for a slightly different reason. There's a messy trade war as their team attempts to retake. They find themselves on point and the player uses Transcendence when they find themselves on a losing end of a duel with a Reaper. Now the timing of the Trance initially doesn't look that bad because the Reaper death blossoms almost at the same time. But really this Trance wasn't used for the good of the team, it was to stop themselves from dying, which almost universally is not a good use for Trance. His Roadhog, who's on point with him, dies to the Death Blossom anyway because the player actually moves away from him in his Trance. As he's using it, teammates are dying to other enemy utility as well. His Pharah dies to a Moira ult and his Mercy dies to a Rhine pin after a Shatter. When you use a Transcendence just to save yourself, you're very likely not to get value with it for your team or help them win a fight that they weren't going to win in the first place. It's almost always a better idea to take that death rather than use such a hugely important ultimate in a way that gets very little value. In a very similar vein, this clip from Ilios Well shows the player in a very aggressive, almost Jonak-like type positioning. Them and their monkey decide to fight the McCree and Moira that are approaching the point from their left. But they don't end up securing any frags, in fact the monkey dies. But the real mistake comes just a moment later. Instead of backing off fully to a safe position, the Zen only backs off a little bit and then decides to use his Transcendence as an escape tool. This, it's safe to say, is not a good use of that ultimate. He does kite back to where the rest of his team are, but they're all behind an Orisa shield taking very little damage. This Trance gets exactly 0 value. Them and their team die quite quickly directly after its use. If you're in such advanced aggressive positioning like they were at the beginning of the clip, it is much better to fight and die and maybe get a frag of your own than it is to waste such a powerful ult and potentially scupper your team's ult economy for the rest of the round. This next clip is from a viewer called Meme Lord who's playing Lucio on Blizzard World Attack 3rd Point. Now I've picked this clip because it really does show you just how devastating using an ult when you don't need to when you've already won a fight can be. Now at the start, they've convincingly won this team fight. The Tracer kills the enemy Ana and their Mei gets the finishing blow on the nanoed Rhine. Now the enemy Hammond is stalling their cart and has got their Zenyatta quite low. Now Meme Lord decides to use his beat to save just one teammate, who in all honesty would have had time to come back from spawn even if he died anyway. Also, here's another thing to consider. That Zenyatta has a Roadhog with him on the cart and Hammond's damage is actually quite weak. Support ults will get more value the bigger the damage threat your teammate is dealing with. So even in those terms, it's a bit of a poor choice. Now they do kill the Hammond and the Zen does stay alive, but the cart's position means that they still have a long way to go to get this over the line, which means that the enemy will definitely have a retake, which as you can see as the rest of the clip plays out, really stretches his team and allows the enemies to get ult value off. And here's the thing about 3rd Point payload or hybrid. The win condition is actually really similar to, say, second point on 2CP. Your team actually needs to keep fragging and sustaining because the enemy spawn is much closer at this point than it is throughout the rest of the map. An ultimate like Lucio's beat would really have helped his team more at this point than it did saving just one person. So what ends up happening is, because he doesn't have it, the enemy's closer respawns eventually take their toll and the momentum of the teamfight swings in their favor. It even ends up arguably costing them the match, as they do go on to lose. These split-second decisions as to whether to use an ult or not can appear at first to be fairly innocuous, but they're really not. Now, a lot of these clips have been based around using a support ult too early. Now, this next one from a user called Think Noodles Pop, who's playing Moira on Anubis defense, is a little bit different. As they're building up their coalescence, both teams are essentially trading in a rather drawn-out fight. Now, the thing is that trading isn't really good enough for a defending team. Your respawns on first point are much further away and the attackers are favoured in that context. But Noodles Pop actually has their ultimate for quite a while as the fight drags out, and there were opportunities where they could have used it to secure some much needed frags. But that doesn't happen. They end up using it way too late to make an impact to this fight. By the time they use it, their Zarya has died and the enemy Mercy has rezzed their D.Va. Now they're really down and Coalescence struggles to get any value. The enemy team uses their Symmetra ult and fire a barrage to help secure the point, and as they push onto point 2, Noodles Pop is left without an ultimate to help turn the tide, and they eventually lose that second point without them ever getting the opportunity to build up another ultimate. So the choice was either use it when it could have got value or take the death and keep it for second. In the end, neither happened and they lost the entire round. Now on Noodles Pop's offensive side, they're playing Mercy. Now the mistake in these sequence of clips is not necessarily when they used Valk, but rather how they used it. And by that I mean there were plenty of opportunities where Noodles Pop could have selected to use damage amp much more in order to secure frags quicker, which is very important when attacking 2CP's second point, rather than keeping healing beam on teammates who are largely at full health already. In the first clip especially, the fight's actually going pretty well. Their D.Va hits a huge bomb and their Torb demechs the enemy D.Va. What they need at this point is even more quick frags, because when you outnumber the defenders on the point and you kill them, their respawns start to get delayed. Now they do kill the remaining defenders, but if Noodles Pop had used damage amp, perhaps they would have been able to do it quicker, which wouldn't have allowed the enemy's respawns to come back and end up stalling the point. Frags and not sustain is actually the win condition here. The second clip is kind of similar. The fight actually starts out great with their Doomfist securing some early picks, but when Noodles Pop does actually Valk, there's a fairly long period of time where they're just holding healing beam on their Zenyatta, who's already at full health. Extra damage output from the Zen and the Doomfist who's near him could have helped swing this fight. As it is, the defenders come out and burst them both down, so essentially the healing beam did absolutely nothing. By that point, the defenders have secured enough frags to be able to hold this defense, and on the final attack, Noodles Pop does well to use Valk to not die to the Reaper, but when they come back and a portion of the enemy team is caught in a Graviton, their only real option at that point is to try and use damage amp to kill those caught inside and perhaps use res afterwards to bring back a teammate at full health. As it happens, the only kill they get from the Grav is the Orisa, and they all eventually get traded out despite the healing coming from Mercy. Now this can be a really hard decision to make, especially as Noodles Pop's teammates were quite low at the time, but sometimes you have to try and make the only play that's available to you, and in this context, healing just wasn't gonna cut it. There's many different ways that impact can be had or missed when it comes to support ult usage. A great way to improve your own implementation of this potentially devastating utility is to record your games and watch them back. Whenever you use a support ult in a fight, ask yourself, would your team have won that fight even if you hadn't ulted? If the answer is yes, then it may come back to bite you later on, as I've shown in the examples. Did you use a very precious ultimate just to save yourself? If you did, then that might help explain why you lose some matches but you don't know why. Just like all resources in Overwatch, the fundamental question is did I get value from it? The first step to getting more value is recognizing when you don't. And that's about it for today's video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a rating. If you never want to miss another video of ours again, please click the bell icon next to the subscribe button on our channel to join the notification squad. And if you would like to have your gameplay reviewed in videos just like these in the future, you can submit them to the email youroverwatchplayers@gmail.com. And finally, please follow the Your Overwatch Twitter. It's where you can find updates about new videos and other cool stuff. I've been Eddie the Chump, and until next time,